Whoops, sorry. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming to the virtual guided woodland hike. Cara is here. She's an environmental educator from Quogue Wildlife Refuge. So she is going to give us a tour. So I'll pass it on to Cara.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucas. Hello, everybody. My name is Cara. I work here at the Quogue Wildlife Refuge as an educator, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys a little bit about the refuge, and then we're going to go on a tour of the trails and our Fairy Dell boardwalk today. So again, if you have any questions during the program, I'm always more than happy to answer questions. I actually embrace questions. Please ask me any questions in the chat, and then I'll be able to read them if you type them in. So the Quogue Wildlife Refuge is a nonprofit nature preserve that was established in 1934. And we're named after the town that we're in. So we're in the town of Quogue, which is right next to West Hampton and Southampton on the South Fork of Long Island. So this photo that you're looking at is of our, right when you walk into the refuge, we have a beautiful freshwater pond and a dock there. And this is one of the scenes that you could see when you visit. So the refuge is a really special place. Again, it is a nonprofit nature preserve, so we are funded just by donations. We run off of the generosity of folks that come and visit, and our obligation and our mission is to serve as responsible land stewards of the refuge property and its resources and promote environmental education. So as Lucas was saying, we do a lot of environmental programs throughout the year, both for children and adults and for families. So if you're interested, you can check out our website for more of our programs or come and visit us at any time. We usually have our newsletter out front, and you can grab one with all of our upcoming programs. This is one of my favorite programs to teach because we started doing this in the early pandemic when not as many people could get outside or travel to go places, and we thought it was a good opportunity for people to still learn about the refuge. So the refuge has a really interesting history that I just wanted to cover briefly before we go into our hike. And the Quogue Ice Company actually operated on site at what is today the Quogue Wildlife Refuge. So these are some photos from the early 1900s when harvesting ice was a really big operation. So on freshwater ponds, they would actually cut up the ice, bring it into this 3-story ice house building, which is the building that's in the center of this mural. So the ice harvesting of the Quogue Ice Company was probably around 1913 here at the on-site, and then maybe ended in the early 1920s when refrigeration was invented. But they had a lot of manpower. They would harvest ice between the months of January, February, and March. They would store it in that really large building with no windows, and the ice chunks could last up to 2 years. So they weren't refrigerated, but because it was pretty well insulated and the chunks of ice were up to 100 pounds, they were really large chunks. They would be insulated with each other, and then in hay and sawdust, then they would be sold to the local community and put in an ice box to keep the food cold. So that's why when we go hiking, the pond that we're going to hike around is called Old Ice Pond. And then after the Quogue Ice Company closed, after electric refrigeration was invented, the refuge became a spot that was used by an organization called the Southampton Township Wildfowl Association. But really, that's just the beginning stages of the Quogue Wildlife Refuge. So a group of conservationists who were hunters, waterfowl hunters in the area of Southampton Town, noticed that wild duck populations were declining from a lot of different factors in the early 1930s. And some of the factors were due to habitat destruction. A lot of it was also from overhunting, and then also some really bad winters that were killing wild duck flocks that couldn't get any food when all of the bodies of water were frozen. So about 45 charter members came together, they formed their organization, and they began the banding ducks, releasing them, and taking care of the flock so that there would be more ducks for future generations. So that's what started the Quogue Wildlife Refuge. That's why the American black duck is our logo. And it took a really big effort. The banding and raising up to 10,000 ducks were born and released here at the Quogue Wildlife Refuge in the early 1930s. And then they would have to feed the flocks, so they would feed them tons of grain and potato mixture, and they would have to cut the ice on the pond in the winter time. These are some photos from that time. And in 1934, they were awarded, I don't know if you guys can hear our chinchillas making a call, just distracted me. But the Southampton Township Wildfowl Association was awarded a trophy it was a nationwide conservation contest by More Game Birds in America, which was the forerunner to Ducks Unlimited. If anyone here is a waterfowl hunter, you might be familiar with Ducks Unlimited, but they won this for their pioneer conservation effort. And so we still have this amazing trophy and the charter that formed the Quogue Wildlife Refuge in 1934. And ever since that time, we've been a wildlife refuge. It's great habitat for waterfowl, ducks, geese, and you can come and see them at any time, but especially the winter when they migrate back to Long Island. So the refuge today, it has 305 acres. We have 7 miles of hiking trails, and we are open every single day of the year from sunrise to sunset. You can come and hike at any time. There are lots of unique habitats that we'll talk about on our hike today. We do have a nature center building, and that's where I am right now. And our nature center building is open currently on the weekends. And then most likely in the fall, we'll be opening to our regular hours, which are Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday from 11 to 4. We have some more exhibits inside of our nature center and some more animals that you come and visit, and a gift shop as well as a restroom. But the trails are I think, our main attraction. We also have more parts to our mission, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes. But we have 7 miles of trails if you combine them all. They are all really well maintained and wide. So we try to keep them wide so that you're not brushing up against grasses or on the sides of the trail where there are shrubs. And of course, you could get thorns or even ticks on the side of the trail, but our trails are nice and wide and well maintained. The longest loop is 3 miles. That's our red trail. But today, if you look on the map for the green trail, which goes around Old Ice Pond, that's where we're going to hike today. And all of these freshwater ponds feed into each other, and then they will eventually flow out to Quantuck Creek. So you can see where the arrow is at the bottom of the map. That will go out to Quantuck Creek. So our preserve is within the Pine Barrens on Long Island. So we have lots of different habitats that are kind of typical of the Pine Barrens, but also some rarer ones. We have a bog that we'll talk about today, pine oak forest, a tidal wetland, and some swamp areas too. But again, open every single day of the year in every season and always free to visit. So we do run off of donations, but there is no admission fee. You can always come and hike for free. And the other seasons, of course, summer is a beautiful time to come and visit, but autumn and winter are really fun. And if anyone here wanted to try cross-country skiing, or if you like to cross-country ski, we rent them here at the refuge in the wintertime when the conditions are good. So you can come back and rent cross-country skis in the wintertime. And then our newest addition to the refuge is across the street on Quantuck Creek. There is a boardwalk that was built in the 1980s. And unfortunately, after some really bad storms and Hurricane Sandy, the boardwalk was dilapidated and it was closed after Hurricane Sandy until 2017. We were awarded a grant by the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation, and we were able to rebuild the DELL boardwalk. So we're going to head over there at the end of our hike, but it's a really nice place to go and visit. And then another really large part of our mission, we take care of permanently injured wildlife that unfortunately, because of their injuries in the wild, they're not able to find their own food, so or survive on their own. So these are some photos of the animals that we take care of. Most of the pictures of the animals on this screen are ones that were wild animals on Long Island that were unfortunately injured. But the reptiles that you see, like our tortoises and the snake, those were people's pets that now we take care of and teach with. So we do programs offsite and at the refuge with our animals, and we try to spread the word how to help our native wildlife. And you can come and visit our wildlife as well. But the preserve is home to a lot of really great species. Silver-haired bat, these are some recently seen animals and native wildlife that are either migratory or live here year-round. White-tailed deer, of course, wood ducks, and this was a cool find, a giant leopard moth caterpillar. And then some more that we were seeing over Old Ice Pond were northern rough-winged swallow, bald eagles, and all these photos were taken at the refuge. Canada geese and goslings in the early springtime. Look at those little cuties. And then largemouth bass in the pond. So we don't allow any fishing, hunting. We don't allow bicycles or dogs on the trail. We try to keep a minimal impact to the habitats, but hiking and you can take pictures of all the things that you see when you come and visit. So let's go for a hike. We have a video of the trail that we're gonna head through together and talk a lot about the different habitats that we have at the refuge, some things that you can look for when you come and visit, and some plants and wildlife that we can learn about. But again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and I have the chat open in case I see any. If you think of anything during the program, you can put it in the chat, and if it's relevant, I'd be happy to answer it at the time that you ask it too. So again, my name is Cara, and we're going to go for a hike at the Quogue Wildlife Refuge. So when you enter the refuge, you'll come through, and this is our main entrance booth. And right on site here is where the Quogue Ice Company operated. The building that we're heading towards is our ice harvesting exhibit, but it used to be the housing for the steam engine that drove the conveyor belt. So this is not the ice house, but it was the housing for the steam engine. So it's most likely around 100 years old, this building. And then inside of here, we have some information about ice harvesting, some of the old tools, saws, and augers that used to be used when there was ice harvesting at the Quogue Wildlife Refuge. Right down there is the cement block that held the steam engine. And then, of course, some more old tools that were used at the time of delivering the ice blocks. So ice harvesting is a really fascinating history. It was kind of quick in the late 1800s and early 1900s, but there are some more ponds on Long Island that were ice harvesting ponds. And then when you enter the refuge, on your left is Old Ice Pond, and on your right are our animal enclosures. So to your left is our biggest freshwater pond, which is 10 acres. And it is pretty shallow throughout the whole pond. And then to your right are our animal enclosures. So we have our fox, a Cooper's hawk, a Virginia possum, screech owls right over here. And you can see our Virginia possum was walking around. He unfortunately is non-releasable because he was brought into a wildlife rehabber missing his tail, and his tail is prehensile, so it helps him in the wild balance. So he would have a really hard time finding his own food and escaping predators. But here is Old Ice Pond. In the early 1900s, it would have looked very different. There would have been no islands out there. It just would have been a large body of water. And then this is our main entrance, but still lots of good things to see around here. We have a trail map right ahead of us. And then if you do visit, the restrooms are just to the right of the trail map. But the refuge, even though we're not going to be hiking all the way up north, there is a lot of good stuff to see. And then, of course, our butterfly garden I wanted to walk through because it is in full bloom. So lots of good flowers to attract native butterflies. And this one right here, does anyone know what it is? This is called common milkweed. And milkweed is the only plant that monarch butterflies will lay their caterpillars on. The caterpillars, it's the host plant of the monarch butterfly. So if you love butterflies, you can plant some milkweed and they'll lay their eggs, and caterpillars will hatch and eat the milkweed. It's actually a really important plant to plant in your garden. And in the butterfly garden, we also have a hummingbird feeder with nectar right over there. We see lots of ruby-throated hummingbirds, which are great pollinators. And then a compost pile, so we try to be as environmentally friendly. Here's a mason bee house. Those are also good insects to have around. And then the compost pile right ahead of us is where we'll turn some of the things that we don't use for our animal care into soil. So a good spot if anyone has a compost pile, great job. So as I was saying earlier, the Quogue Wildlife Refuge is within the Pine Barrens on Long Island, and a lot of the Pine Barrens has been protected, which is great news for both wildlife species and for people. So there are a lot of really rare animal species that are endemic or just thrive in the Pine Barrens. The eastern tiger salamander is a very rare salamander just in the Pine Barrens on Long Island. There are also rare insects that only live in the Pine Barrens. And when we're hiking, right now at least, you'll see a lot of deciduous trees. So the trees that are on our left and right are mostly shrubs. As we keep hiking, we'll talk a little bit more about the pines. But we also, to our right, have around 36 honeybee hives. So those hives are important. We actually have a beekeeper. He'll collect the honey. If we have extra, we'll sell it in the gift shop. But honeybees are really important pollinators, as well as other bees. And so our honeybee hives are right to the right there. So on the green trail, we can see a field, a bog, and then, of course, it's great example of the Pine Barrens. And then we'll go through our swampy areas as well. And does anyone here love to go hiking or has seen any animals out on the trail that maybe they would like to learn more about? You can always ask in the chat, but I did want to mention that sometimes in the summertime, it might be a little harder to actually see animals if they're coming out at dawn and dusk when it's a little bit cooler, but you can most of the time find evidence of animals, especially mammals. So here in the field, some things that we'll look for at the top of this pole are some houses for tree swallows. And then the house that's bright white and has a lot of holes in it is for purple martins. Both of those birds are migratory and they're swallow species. They love to eat insects. So this is a great habitat for insects. And it's much wider and it's kept open because there's not as much canopy. So we keep it open because it is a very different habitat. If we didn't, natural succession would come through. There would be trees that would grow through the middle and eventually it would turn into looking like the rest of the refuge. But there is a very special plant that grows in the field and it's called the prickly pear cactus. So here it is. It's Long Island's only native cactus. Did you guys know that we have cactus on Long Island? So you can usually find the prickly pear cactus in hot, sandy areas. And the yellow flower will turn into a bright red fruit. That's actually at the top of these pads here. And that bright red fruit is really good for native wildlife. So eastern box turtles will eat the prickly pear. It's called a prickly pear. That's the fruit. So we'll see, this is great habitat for insects, but also for eastern box turtles. And unfortunately, eastern box turtles are declining on Long Island due to habitat loss. Also due to pesticide spraying can affect them since they live on the ground. But eastern box turtles will eat a variety of things like fruits. They'll also eat other animals if they came across an insect that they could eat, or eggs. Even our box turtles that we take care of love hard-boiled eggs. But this is a good spot to look for them. And then as we continue out of the field, it's starting to look more like the pine barrens. So you'll see lots of very tall pitch pine trees, a lot of pine needles on the forest floor. But the Pine Barrens gets its name because of course, the pine trees, and it's usually pitch pines that grow. But this sign I wanted to point out, you might see it, says dwarf pines, and then we're going to head towards the bridge. But the dwarf pines is a globally rare ecosystem. It's found in only 3 places in the world, and one of them is at the refuge, at the northern end of the refuge, and then through West Hampton. But the dwarf pines only grow to about 6 feet high. They're very small. And the collection of plants in the dwarf pines is what makes it globally rare. So it's a globally rare ecosystem. And then this is a great little spot, an offshoot of Old Ice Pond. And there's a snapping turtle right in front of you. You can kind of see the shell sitting in the water. And his head was kind of peeked up, but then he went underwater. But snapping turtles will usually sit and wait for maybe a bug, a frog, or a small fish to go across their way. Snapping turtles get kind of the bad reputation that they're bullies or that they'll bite you, but they don't. They will view a person as a predator and swim away. If you were to try to touch one, they might get nervous, and the only way to protect themselves is with their jaws and with their claws, so they'll try to walk away. But it's very important if you do see wildlife just to give them plenty of space and to not try to handle them or move them unless they're in danger. But going across Old Ice Pond now on a bridge on the Green Trail, and this is another really good spot to look for snapping turtles. They will usually be in the water on the sides of the bridge, but snapping turtles, painted turtles, those are 2 native turtles that are fairly common. And then some others that aren't as common but are still water turtles are spotted turtles, mud turtles. So usually in the water, you might be able to spot some reptiles. And since turtles are reptiles, they breathe air, they lay eggs, and when they're born looking like a turtle or a lizard or a snake. Whereas amphibians, like frogs and salamanders, will go through a different life cycle, right? When you think of a frog when they're born, they look a lot very different. They look like a tadpole. So then they'll develop legs, and they'll turn into a frog and live on land for the most part. And then hiking through, we are now in a habitat called the bog. And before we get there, I wanted to show you all, I thought this was very cool, some evidence that was left behind. So would anyone like to guess whose scat that's from? I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to wait. Maybe we'll announce it at the end to give everyone time to guess. But there was evidence of an animal on the bridge. That was the scat. So I'm going to give it a few minutes before we announce what it was, if you would like to take a guess. And then here is our bog. When you go down towards the bog acts like a big sponge. It soaks up water. And this is a pitcher plant, which a pitcher plant is a carnivorous plant. So it's down there, it has the bright green and a little bit of red, but it will catch bugs in the pitcher and slowly eat them. So it's a carnivorous plant. And then the bog also has cranberries. Some very rare orchids grow here too, and it's very acidic. So the bog is like a big sponge, it soaks up water. And in general, the Pine Barrens has very nutrient poor soil, and that's why it's called the Pine Barrens. So, of course, lots of pines, but the barren refers to the nutrient poor soil. And even though it's nutrient poor, we have lots of pitch pines, shrubs. So, in terms of our forest layers, the canopy is usually pitch pines. Those are the tallest trees that you see right now when we're hiking. And then the lower understory, or the shrub layer, is high bush blueberry, low bush blueberry, sometimes some bayberry and laurel. There's lots of shrubs underneath the canopy, so in the forest layer. And so one evergreen, or a couple evergreens that we're very lucky to have in our habitats, and it keeps everything looking beautiful and green in the wintertime, are inkberry. And inkberry grows along the edge of this trail in particular. So that's what we're kind of walking through. Inkberry is in the family of holly. So I'm sure a lot of us know holly, but it's in the Ilex genus. And this is inkberry right here. So it has these waxy oval shaped leaves. They don't lose their leaves, so they're an evergreen. And if you come in the winter, you'll see lots of this plant, inkberry. It grows a berry that's very when the berry falls, it usually stains things that it falls on, so that's why it's called inkberry. But inkberry, so here's a berry. It grows really close to blueberry on our trails, and you can kind of tell that looks a lot like a blueberry. So we don't allow any picking of berries or picking of plants or flowers. We want everything to be left for wildlife. But here is a blueberry. And again, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. So inkberry would upset a person's stomach. So we would not allow anyone to eat berries here at the refuge. But both are great for wildlife. So blueberries and inkberries are really good for wildlife and actually are important in the pine barrens because there's not as much food for animals. Those plants are really important, but also acorns. So as we're hiking, I'll point out where we have some oaks, and then the oaks are very important for the acorns. And here's some more blueberry. So blueberry is really good for deer, for raccoons, for possums, especially when the blueberries will fall to the ground. Very good for birds that are nesting at the refuge. So we didn't get any guesses, but that's okay, about our scat that was on the bridge. Maybe I'm just really excited about scat. But I think that what we were seeing was from a raccoon. So I think that was raccoon scat. This is scrub oak. And then above it is white oak. So there's a few different types of oak that grow on this trail. But it is the scrub oak, at least, is the host plant for the buck moth. And in the pine barrens, the buck moth will fly in October in the morning. So it's actually really cool to look for in the months of October because they'll fly during the day. Most moths are nocturnal, but this moth will fly during the daytime. So it's actually, if it's around, it's fairly easy to spot. And then speaking of insects, this is called an oak apple gall. So it looks like this brown circular thing that's usually hanging off of an oak tree. And what this actually is from a gall wasp, so from an insect. The gall wasp will deposit the egg on the plant, and the plant doesn't know what to do. So it grows around the egg, and it makes a nursery for the baby wasp. The baby wasp will live in there, it will eat, and then hatch out. So that's what a gall is, Gall. This is a pitch pine tree. Again, the main tree that grows in the pine barrens. And the pine barrens has a really interesting fire ecology. So it's adapted to forest fire, but some animals will still use a tree even though they're very tough. So these holes are from a yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is a type of woodpecker. They're in a straight line, and that's how you can tell. But pine trees have very thick bark, but also the needles fall to the ground and are really good for animals, especially insects and microorganisms living in the soil. And a pitch pine has 3 needles. That's what I was trying to show. But needles with 3, I try to remember it like a pitchfork from a pitch pine. And then the pine cones are really important for animals, but these are some pine cones that are in various stages of being chewed up by squirrels. So the gray squirrel or other rodents, chipmunks, mice will chew on pine cones. And then there's the 3 needles. And I see some people want to see some flying squirrels, and I agree. Flying squirrels are very cute. And that was one spot, Lucas, that I've seen flying squirrels, but I've only seen them once at the refuge, and they're called the southern flying squirrel, but they are native to our area. They're nocturnal, so they're harder to see. But if you come on a full moon night hike, we might have the chance to see one. And then this is the other type of pine tree that we have at the refuge. It's called a white pine. White pines also grow in the pine barrens, but are not as numerous as the pitch pine. They have 5 needles in a cluster for the white pine, whereas pitch pines has 3. We are kind of at the end of the green trail here. And here's an overlook on Old Ice Pond. We'll hear a lot of different frog species on the edge of the pond here. That plant is called purple loosestrife. And then on the trail that we're going to be walking down right now, this is actually an artificial man-made dam. In 1913, when the Quogue Ice Company moved locations, they made this earthen dam to hold in the water to our left in Old Ice Pond. So essentially they made the pond a little bit bigger and better for ice harvesting. So the dam holds the water in Old Ice Pond. The pond is groundwater fed and rainwater fed. This right here, though, is a very cool tree to look for. It's called a sassafras. Sassafras used to be used to make root beer. And the leaves are in 3 different shapes: a regular leaf, a mitten, and then a dinosaur footprint. So you can look for trees, and that's a sassafras. Along this path, because it is so close to the water, we'll see some very cool plants. To the left is a soap bush, but this is some eggshells from a turtle nest. So this is most likely from a painted turtle that laid their eggs. They come out of the water to lay their eggs in a shallow depression. When the eggs hatch, when the babies are born, you will see lots of leftover eggshells. So that's what we just saw there. And this is soap bush. The flowers will bloom and there'll be lots of pollinators around here. But because this is so close to water, it's a really important habitat for migratory birds, especially warblers in the springtime. We'll see a lot of warblers. And then to our left is the one spot where it's called a spillway. So it's almost like a little waterfall where if the pond level gets too high, it will spill over and go underneath our feet here into the creek. So here's Old Ice Pond, and all of those islands were built for American black ducks. Here's the spillway, and some different fish that live in the pond are American eels. American eels will actually come up the creek and go all the way up the spillway and into the pond to mature behind us. And then here's the creek where this will lead into Quanta Creek, where we're going to head when we visit Fairy Dell. Other fish that you can see are largemouth bass, bluegilled sunfish, brown bullhead catfish. All of them, though, are freshwater fish. So we don't allow people to go fishing, but we do see osprey, and they'll go fishing on the pond. They'll dive in for fish, and we'll see them catch some pretty big ones. It's kind of amazing. And then this is a very nice habitat called Chocolate Pudding Pond, but it's just a very swampy area that looks like chocolate pudding because when the leaves fall in, they break down, the tannins break down in the leaves and make it look very muddy. So it's a very swampy area. But through this very swampy area, there are these really big leaves, green leaves that love to grow near water. So here's one, and it's called skunk cabbage. Skunk cabbage is actually a wildflower, and it grows in very moist areas. But it is a wildflower that does not smell very good. So here it is again. And based on its name, I bet you can guess what it smells like. It smells like skunks when you break a leaf. But a lot of different animals will eat it, and Canada geese will actually eat the leaves of skunk cabbage. This is our Nature Center building. And we made it through the green trail together. So great job, everybody. And again, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them in the chat. But we are going to go to Fairy Dell. So Fairy Dell is just across the street from the main property. So it's still a part of the Quogue Wildlife Refuge, but we're going to go to the Fairy Dell Boardwalk. So it's a part of our property, but it's kind of broken up between the train tracks and Old Country Road. So all you have to do is head out across the train tracks and head towards the road. And then once you cross the train tracks, you'll be walking through this little path, and then you'll see the black gates to Fairy Dell. So here we are. You just want to head through the gates when they're open. And the Fairy Dell Boardwalk is a pretty historic area for the town of Quogue. So in the early 1900s and the 1800s, people used to summer in Quogue, and then they'd paddle through the creek. They'd do picnic lunches. It became a spot, very magical spot, which is why it got its name Fairy Dell. And people would get engaged here in old history notes we were reading. But there's a map of the boardwalk, and we do have the same rules at the boardwalk: no dogs, bicycles, and no smoking. But some really cool plants that grow along here. It looks very different than the main property because we're much closer to the creek. The creek is brackish water, so it's a little bit of salt water and a little bit of fresh water. So we're getting closer to the ocean. We're going southward. But because there is a good amount of fresh water, we see plants like right here, this fern. This is called cinnamon fern. Really beautiful plant. And then some skunk cabbage under there. Did anyone see the skunk cabbage? And then some other plants that will grow. This tree right here is called a tupelo tree. Tupelos love fresh water, and their bark looks like alligator skin. So tupelo. But Fairy Dell Boardwalk the Fairy Dell Creek looked very different in the early 1900s. It probably looked a lot like the portion that we're walking through right now, with a lot of freshwater trees, ferns. But as we continue walking, I'll talk a little bit more about why it looks different. But you will probably notice that there are a lot of reeds on the side of the boardwalk, and this is called Phragmites. Phragmites is an invasive plant that was brought from Europe and Asia in ship ballast accidentally. And it is very aggressive, so it's invasive, but it does grow along North American waterways, and it's exploded through them. This is an eastern red cedar. This is a native plant, so this is a good plant to have around. But the berries are important for wildlife, the eastern red cedar. But going back to the Phragmites, there's virtually nothing that can be done about this invasive plant because it really grows in almost every waterway in the eastern United States. And unfortunately, it outcompetes native reeds, so like cattails, other native Phragmites. But scientists have been studying it for a fairly long time, and even though it's invasive, it does still have value to wildlife. There are some not so good things about it and some okay things about Phragmites. But we do have an osprey nest here at Fairy Dell, which was the nest that was on top of the pole. And then so in the 1900s and the late 1800s, it looked very different here at Fairy Dell. There was no Phragmites. The body of water was more fresh water because it was actually dammed by Montauk Highway, which is to our left. So the fresh water was impounded in the creek, and they were harvesting ice over here first. But then some federal regulations came through. They had to remove the dam at Montauk Highway at the causeway, and then salt water came in through the bay. The salt water ended up, some plants can't survive a high salinity, so it ended up killing some of the freshwater trees that grew along the stream. So that's why it looks very different today. Still really good for wildlife. So there are some trees across the way that you can see don't have any leaves. Those are called snags. There's an osprey sitting on one. right over there. And then some great egrets, those white herons that are sitting down low in the creek. But even some dead trees in the creek, those are really good for animals that are cavity nesters. There are some in the creek, and crabs and other fish can hide under them. So it's still very good habitat. So beautiful spot over at Ferrydale. We have a lot of benches, and it is a quarter-mile boardwalk. It ends in terminal platforms, so you cannot get lost at the boardwalk. And then down there are some stumps that I wanted to show you. All right. Well, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I wanted to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you'll come and visit us at the Quogue Wildlife Refuge. If you follow us on Instagram and Facebook, we'll usually post some good stories about our animals or even some history posts as well. So I just wanted to thank you all for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed the program. But again, I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Cara. That was really cool. I never knew that this Fairy Dell walk existed. When
Yeah.
did you say that that got put in?
Yeah, so it was originally built in the 80s, and then it was closed from probably 2012 to 2017.
Okay,
And it was rebuilt and opened in 2018.
okay, cool. Now I want to come back because I
Yeah.
never saw that part.
And there is parking. I meant to say this. There is parking along the left edge of the black fence, so you can park there too. Oh, great. I like that it was a painless walk too.
That's good.
Right? No mosquito bites. Thanks, Arlene. Yeah, and we do have some more information on our website. We have up-to-date information too about, what's going on at the refuge there. So you can find us on online as well.
I also didn't know that the dwarf pines was such a rare ecosystem that there's only 3 places in the world that have that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And the other places are in New Jersey and upstate New York.
Okay, wow. So
Yeah,
really all located around here.
yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah.
Anybody else, if you have a question, you can throw it in the chat and make sure it says all panelists and attendees, then we'll all see it. Any tie-in with Morton Refuge, asks Arlene.
Yeah, great question. Actually, the Morton Refuge is, I believe, a national Morton is in the national complex, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or it might be U.S. Fish and Wildlife. But we are not connected. I know I love Morton. It's such a beautiful spot, and I highly recommend it. But so we are not affiliated with each other. I think they are operated by, if I'm not mistaken, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. But beautiful spot. And then here at the refuge, we are, a wildlife refuge, but a nonprofit. So great question.
Where is that Morton Refuge?
That is in Elizabeth Morton is in Sag Harbor.
Okay, cool.
And that's a really nice spot. And that's the one where if you put a little bird seed in your hand, the birds will come and land.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people will do that. We'll see them at our bird feeders, and then we'll be like, oh, I think you might have to go a little bit further east for
Yes, now that you said that, I remember my coworker showing me a photo
right.
of her with the birds in her hand from there.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's pretty cool. It's a beautiful spot.
Okay, I think everyone's good on questions. So thank you again, Cara. Thank you everybody for coming. I hope that someday you can make it to Quogue Refuge. It's about maybe 35 to 40 minutes, maybe 40 to 45 from our district. And which day you're open most days, right?
Yes. So the preserve and the trails are open every day from sunrise to sunset. And then our nature center through the summer is open on weekends. And then in the fall, we'll probably go back to our normal hours. And the nature center is usually open Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday from 11 to 4.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you so much, everybody. Get out there, get hiking, get into nature this summer while there's time. Well, there should be time for a long time.
Right. But it's always a good time to get outside, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucas.
Yes. Thank you, Cara.
See you soon.